In my last video, I talked about how I grew up watching Voyager and I love it today partly because of the nostalgia. But one of the cool things about a show like Voyager is that it has a rich reserve of playful content that appealed to me as a kid, as well as a rich reserve of mature content that had a lot more impact when I grew up. So I'm doing a kind of a run through of examples to make that point just for the fun of it. Last video I started off with Faces, which stands out as perhaps one of, or maybe possibly the most unforgettable grown-up moment, we'll call it, for me in Voyager. The next one I put on my list was Hope and Fear. I hesitated to put it on the list, even though it definitely was the second one that popped in my head. I hesitated because it's not one that I would necessarily consider a great episode, quote-unquote. And as a kid, I quickly concluded it was one of the most boring episodes in the whole series after I had watched it as a rerun a number of times. However, it became unforgettable to me, quote unquote, because of the adult experience, we'll say, that I had while watching it. So I guess it goes on the list. For most television, episode titles tend to be something that you can think of as an afterthought. For much of Star Trek, the titles seem to have a life of their own. Almost like the titles, sometimes it almost seems like the title is intended to be an appendix to the show or a prequel to the show. And in this particular case, the title is almost like a decoder ring for the episode. Since the words hope and fear, as far as I know, those words don't appear in the episode. As a kid, I would have told you it was a boring episode about the Voyager crew almost getting home, which is a story element that they retell a number of times in Voyager, and so it makes you yawn just to see it. The only thing redeeming it would have been that our heroes almost got assimilated by the Borg at the end. And there's also this super cool pretend Starfleet prototype ship with a new kind of propulsion engine. Of course, it turns out it's all a trap by an angry alien who wants to kill them all. So, as an adult, going through the series, I didn't expect a whole lot when I hit play. This was like 5 or 6 years ago. I expected some old Voyager cliches and one big-headed alien. Literally, his head is large. But instead, I found, well, hope and fear. I found a portrait and a set of examples of what it means when people experience hope that was unexpected and means a lot to them. How do people respond? How should people respond? How about the person who experiences tantalizing hope? And how about the person who's outside of that watching somebody else get tantalized by hope? And then that hope is played against fear. Because the very same thing that causes some people hope, an opportunity to go somewhere that they long to go, to rejoin a community in a world that's familiar but distant. That same thing can also cause paralyzing fear. In Seven's case, she found herself so uncomfortable with the unknown in this prospect of getting back to the Alpha Quadrant that she lost objectivity and became terrifyingly uncentered. She initially refers to her feelings as ambivalence, which, according to Google Dictionary, it means mixed feelings, consisting of mixed feelings. But as the episode continues, her fear expresses itself in anger, stubbornness, disregard for others, and this one passionate decision to reject the source of hope. Seeing this beautiful mosaic that compares hope and fear was a pretty cool experience for me, and many may see themselves in the emotions and proclivities that the Voyager crew shows. This tendency to give oneself completely to hope and lose objectivity, and the sense of skepticism or a healthy caution toward hope as being, too hopeful. And then as well, this self-hating refusal to expose oneself to hope mingled with fear. What none of the characters said in the dialogue, but what is suggested by the title, some people might be helped by hearing, if you were to say, you may not realize it, but maybe what you're experiencing is hope and fear. Two enemies warring inside you, and you hate them both with disgust, but you may not actually hate the people around you the way your actions are making it seem. As I was preparing to put this video together, I took some time to refresh my memory on the episode. I didn't have time to actually watch the episode, so I pulled it up on Memory Alpha and I read. And I found myself intrigued as I was reminded of a whole variety of familiar content that goes alongside the hope and fear theme. And I thought to myself, this episode could have been called Intuition and Hope and Fear, and Acceptance and Hatred. And I just want to go through those real quick. The intuition element refers to the discussion, I'm referring to this discussion at the beginning between Seven and Janeway as they're playing Velocity on the holodeck. That scene was actually, as a kid, it was the first time I ever heard the word intuition, at least that I remember. And so as a young person, when Captain Janeway defined intuition, that was my definition for life. Now, of course, Seven mocks the concept of intuition. Janeway accepts it. Throughout the episode, we see that Janeway carefully handles her intuitive reactions to hope and fear, whereas Seven violently rejects intuition along with the rest of her internal feelings that she doesn't understand. Janeway's careful handling of her intuition allows her to follow the path of hope while making plans for the possibility that she could be being deceived. That's the fear. Seven's intuition, on the other hand, leaves her terrified by the ambiguity of hope. Unable to look clearly at her own feelings with acceptance and curiosity, Seven finds herself out of control, rejecting the help of those around her and refusing to entertain the thought of getting closer to the source of her mixed-up feelings. She obstinately insists that she's going to stay in the Delta Quadrant while the rest of the crew goes off home. And then, fittingly, we actually end up seeing acceptance and hatred playing out near the end of the episode. And of course, I'm skipping the part about finding out that they've been deceived by this alien. That's the action-adventure plot element. That was the part that held my attention as a kid. Alien with the big head is a traitor. Very important plot element. But how does that fit into hope and fear? Other than the fact that somebody's hope can be used to manipulate them, and people like Big Head Alien can take advantage of your hope. Well, the way I see it, the mosaic continues with the themes of acceptance and hatred, when our heroes are having their final discussions with the traitor alien as he tries to ship them off to the Borg. He confesses his motivations of revenge. He says his people were wiped out by the Borg and he blames it on Voyager. But he points out he doesn't feel rage or hate or revenge for the Borg. And this is an illustration that ever since I saw it in the show as a kid, it's always been coming back to me in my head because it's so psychologically accurate, and it kind of stands out. It's this thing that he didn't hate the Borg, and he says the Borg collective is like a force of nature. You don't feel anger toward a storm on the horizon. You just avoid it. And that's a quote I took off of Memory Alpha. So he didn't use the language, but he was basically saying that his experience of hatred didn't apply to the Borg because it was in connection with attitude, mindset, and beliefs. The difference between his response to the Borg and his response to Voyager was a difference between acceptance and hatred. Even though the Borg were the actual source of evil and Voyager was a force of good, I mean, that's what he told them early on, that Voyager was being a source of good to all kinds of people. But even though that was the case, he's experiencing a cognitive state of acceptance in regard to the Borg. The way he puts it is, they just are. There's nothing he can do about it. But a cognitive mindset of hatred toward Voyager, because they have no right to interfere. I will make them pay, So, and then we see the attitude of acceptance. We see it especially vividly in the end, when his ship is being pulled in by the Borg, and he kind of calmly sits in his chair waiting for his hopeless fate to come. So once again, I'm not saying that I thought this show was one of the most compelling of all Star Trek, or I'm not saying that it has one of the best depictions of these particular psychological themes. I'm just saying that when I watched it as a grown-up, it hit me with this impact, because when I was expecting a kind of trite Trek cliche about Voyager getting home, and instead I got hope and fear, and intuition, and acceptance and hate. And those are all a big deal. Next video, I'll be talking about Persistence of Vision, another episode that definitely receives mixed reviews from fans, but for me included some unforgettable grown-up moments, we'll say, that mean a lot.